I hope that suddenly, because it's on the don't say content page. I think we might be live, actually.
We are.
We're physically live right now.
Physically live. Living alive.
Living alive. I just like to see if, hi, everybody. This is what it's like when you're, oh my God, that was a lot. I hope nobody heard that. I just
What?
like to have the other platforms open because when last time people asked questions,
Yeah.
and I wanted to make sure.
I
Hi,
didn't hear the
everybody.
reverb. Hello, everyone. We've got a
Listen,
guest.
how's your day going, everybody? Mine is clearly a bit chaotic, but I feel like that's always me, like trying to make technology part of our podcast work. It's just, it is what it is. Okay, I'm ready. Are you guys ready?
I'm ready.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're doing another live episode. I know it's back to back, but we were super excited to get Ned on the phone with us. He's the chief revenue officer at Power Digital, which his company was Endrock was just acquired. And you made sort of a brand experimentation software, which don't worry, I'll let you say way better than me in a second. And I've known Power Digital now for a couple years through my friend JH. He introduced me to Alex Bauer a long time ago, who runs their partner program. And I fell in love with like one, the way you guys run your business, but two, like I haven't met anyone who doesn't like you. They're like, oh yeah, Power Digital is great. And it's like, I think that's really hard for an agency to do at scale. And so I think given that you guys have you're bigger than a lot of agencies that I work with day to day. I feel like you have a broader perspective on some of the things that we're seeing in marketing. So specifically on the sort of consumer behavioral side, and really curious to dig into the experimentation side of things, because I think there might be some stuff that content marketers specifically could apply to the way they're pitching work right now or pitching strategy right now. So Ned, because you're not a regular for us, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself really quickly
and
Super,
update
yeah.
your title. I don't think he's.
No, all
Chief.
good, all good.
No, I
Chief
know
Growth
You're just
Officer.
looking at CRO of conversion rate optimization and thinking chief revenue officer.
Damn it.
No, it's no.
This is the third time I've done this.
No, all good, all good. Currently Chief Growth Officer for Power Digital. We're about a 700 person agency servicing about 600 clients. So yes, I previously was the founder of an agency called Endrock, which is a consumer analytics growth experimentation agency, more affectionately referred to as CRO, right? Conversion rate optimization. Although we do focus, frankly, just as much time on average order value experimentation, understanding UPT trends, unit per transaction trends, basically the intersection of behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, and consumer analytics, all post-click optimization. So in the broader digital space, we spend a lot of time talking about how do you target more users top of funnel? How do you get them cost effectively, CAC optimization to your site? We don't spend as much typically talking about like what are the behavioral psych isms that are going to get them to have a higher propensity to convert once they're on the site or in the application or on the platform. Even things like viral co-efficiency. How do we boost the propensity for them to refer and talk about the product to other folks, right? So that's the world that I live in. My background's traditionally in statistics, and I had started the company technically in 2016 as just kind of like a sole operator to provide this as a service to clients, as like an in-house experimentation and analytics guy, right? So that did pretty well, and the demand started to increase, and kind of saw the writing on the wall that there was scalability with the model. So beginning of 2019, I created the agency itself and then scaled that to about 100 folks on the team. We had about 120-ish clients, I want to say. And then we were acquired by Power Digital this past December. So Power is kind of second to none in the industry, just a dream partner. And obviously, as exceptional as they are on the technical side and servicing clients, I mean, you should see the culture internally. It's really impressive. And I really prided myself in the culture that we built at Enrog. And I'm just like every day super impressed by the culture at Power. And I think that's really the ethos to its success to date is it's a super homogenous group and really talented folks and a very flat organization. So I say that because it's funny, like, I'm not the chief revenue officer, I'm the chief growth officer, but the reality is it's so flat. We all communicate so, not on a more of a vertical, typical hierarchical structure, but more on just like a flat style communication that, to some degree, it doesn't matter if you're CEO, CGO, junior account manager, everyone has a voice, everyone's opinion's heard. And it's a really amazing environment. You can see that from our growth, right? Our clients see a lot of growth too. So
That's fascinating to me about like large organizations that are scaling but fairly flat. What do you think? I'm going to go off script here a little bit, but what do you think the cultural values or the rituals that you put in place are that really help do that? Because that's tricky.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of like putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like everyone talks about commitment to excellence. Everyone talks about like a culture of shared respect and responsibility. Not a lot of groups actually act on that though. When you really get in, it's like, yeah, you preached a good game, but like when you really get in there, it's just the same old, like got to report to this person who shuts ideas down. I mean, here's a good example. We have an internal Slack channel called Claps for Coworkers, right? Which is exactly what it sounds like. It's people giving shout outs and basically commenting on the successes of their coworkers. That channel is just like on fire every day. Like every day there's people, and you can really see the emotional impact that has, especially on folks who are either new into the agency or, just in general are moving up the ranks to get that type of, comment from someone else in front of 700-800 other people, and everyone's chiming in, great job, et cetera. It may sound small, that is a huge impact, right? And so it's another one of those where everyone in the company is kind of involved in this kind of congratulatory loop when someone has a big win, no matter, even if it's a small win, like a client just writes a note like, hey, love this week's performance, everything looks great. A lot of times that'll get shared internally so everyone can kind of mutually celebrate in that success. And then at the same time, it again, on the flat organization piece, I mean, like Jeff, our CEO, as an example, is incredibly available. It doesn't matter who you are in the company. I mean, he's got time for virtually everyone. Will hear it out and actually act on a lot of the recommendations or feedback that he gets versus typically big companies. A lot of that's like, yeah, put your note in the suggestion box and we'll get to it, right?
We'll burn it at the end of the day.
I was nervous about it at first because like, I don't know, our team's always been super intimate. I didn't know how folks were going to react, and it's been really impressive to watch. So yeah, it starts at the top. Grayson, the original kind of founder of the agency, is I think probably the most important in that equation, where he kind of set the tone early on, and it's really infiltrated itself, that culture, into every facet of the agency. So
it sounds like it's more carrots than sticks, but it also makes sense if you're thinking about behavior and human psychology, to make sure that culturally you're doing the same thing that you're trying to do for your customers, your clients, and for their customers and clients, right?
Yeah, I think so. And because you see this a lot with the client communication, I like what you said there with like more carrots than sticks. So you'll be on a client call sometimes and the team will start going back and forth internally and the client's just watching, where someone on the team will bring up a data point and then someone else on our team internally in front of the client will be like, that's a really good point. We didn't think of that. What if we tried this? And all of a sudden there's this beautiful like brainstorming session. You watch the client just like watching this ping pong match back and forth, and they see how I think dedicated the team really is to the account. It's way more than just like ticking a box in the account management front. They're actually in some cases even like more committed, awkwardly enough, than even some of the internal teams of the client. And so because of that, clients just I think really appreciate that level of commitment, and understanding that, yeah, we are a big agency, but try to treat it as if we are a high touch, smaller group as well. But yeah, it definitely, as you mentioned, kind of infiltrates into the client sentiment realm.
So speaking of you being a big agency and serving a lot of clients, just curious, like, what are you all seeing in terms of like buying behavior trends across B2B and B2C? So, you're trying to help your customers grow. And so I feel like you have a unique insight into sort of a large amount of both companies trying to grow and their buyers. So, just curious what trends you're seeing.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, we could spend an hour on that. That's a big question. It's a great one. So, let me just, from my perspective, because again, being kind of the conversion rate optimization guy, I'm always looking at what's working, what's not working from a behavioral psych and from an analytics perspective, right? So one that we can touch on that's kind of fascinating, we've been seeing this creep in more and more over the last year is the lack of incrementality benefits to discounting seems to be hitting curves of diminishing marginal return. So what I mean by that is we've got a few clients who kind of always go in and out of discounting cycles, right? This week it's 10% off and it's friends and family sale. Next week it's 20% off and it's whatever spring sale. And then after that it's XYZ sale. We're seeing because oftentimes when you launch a sale, you'll see the spike, right? And the conversion rate naturally, especially from new users. But what's fascinating about it is you also get these repeat users who will digest the sale. But then after 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, the allure of the sale starts to diminish. It's really interesting. You see this diminishing marginal curve, right? On diminishing marginal return on this kind of yield curve of the benefit of a conversion rate lift from a sale. And what used to be on a lot of our clients weeks before that happened, I'm seeing that happen in like days now. So it's one of these things where, discounting, I've got a whole bunch of criticisms on discounting to begin with, right? Not the least of which is the margin hits, but it's almost like, okay, well, if we can't discount to get these sales velocity increases that we need, what do we do? And so one of the tactics that we're employing with a lot of clients now is going back to like the basic tenets of scarcity and urgency, which is that's the other big lever that you have. Of course, discounting is always one. Hey, the price is usually 100 for you today, special price, it's $80. But you also have other aspects, which is like, look, this product may not be available tomorrow, right? As an example, like create that urgency. I mean, you think about like an airline site or a hotel site. What are they always doing? They'll say things like 3 seats left at this price, right? They do that because it's a basic tenet of behavioral psychology that when they highlight scarcity, the reactive emotion is typically urgency. So I'm seeing more and more brands, and we're pushing them to kind of go in that direction because A, it's becoming more and more obvious its effectiveness, and B, with the lack of return on discounting, this is your other lever to pull. And oh, by the way, it doesn't hit your margin, right? So that's a big one. And again, this isn't going to be universally true on every brand. It depends on where you are in the AOV band or what products you're selling. But that's definitely a trend that we're seeing and acting on right now.
Yeah. What about on the B2B side? Like what is like, would you extend that into like software purchasing, or are you seeing something unique with your B2B clients in terms of like what's working from specifically like a conversion standpoint? I know like some agencies I'm working with are, sort of battling the SEO, the search change, the Google search changes with their SEO clients, and they're seeing kind of a mixed bag of, reduced traffic, but like conversion rates are either staying the same or increasing. And so I feel like it's hard for me to get a handle on like what it is and what's working. So just whatever
It's also hard to say that software is scarce.
Yeah. Good point. I mean, one thing, again, of many that could be said here, one that I'm noticing is with the advent of a lot of AI technologies that a lot of companies are incorporating, they're losing that intimacy when you're going through the sales cycle. And a good way to put that is a lot of them are leaning, and I'm all about automations, trust me, but they're leaning disproportionately on it. And internally, at first glance, it looks good because it seems more efficient. That work stream or that sales cycle that used to take X hours is now taking only 50% of X. But you got to keep in mind, some users are picking up on that and they're noticing that this is just automated, right? And like we've all experienced, like LinkedIn's a good example. I get peppered with LinkedIn requests, and it's so obvious with some of them that it's like, this isn't a real person saying this. This is so clear this has been generated. And you can even just read through some of the verbiage on it. And it's like, it just, the way it's written, it's like, this isn't personable. This is not conversational. This isn't personable.
Hello, Devin. I've looked at your profile and it seems that we have similar interests.
Yeah.
Exactly. Connect and learn from each other.
Exactly. Thank you for the connection. And it's just like, this is so robotic, right? And so what I would say is, yes, in this world of AI and all the benefits that's going to provide your business, absolutely explore that, absolutely take advantage of that. But be cognizant. You're still having some of these intimate conversations with potential, because you mentioned B2B, larger ticket items, usually they still need that like human interference in a way. So yes, use it to automate, but be careful you're not going too far on that curve that you kind of lose that touch that you used to have. And, that's going to be a balancing act I think we're going to have to deal with for a long time going forward.
I've seen a lot of that actually with some of my agency clients, where they're really, I think they don't have the same resources that they used to. So they're functioning with a leaner team, and they are under a lot of pressure still, perhaps more than before, to sort of like show results quickly, consistently.
Yeah.
Like there's no real time to build something up right now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've talked to more than one company recently that was talking about publishing 100 blog posts a month. And I'm like, you know, it's just sort of that like, and they're automating some of it with AI, but then some of that is like, you know, you can very easily, you could tell that it's AI. And so, you know, I'm seeing a lot of automation in their marketing, which I understand with you, it isn't necessarily bad, but
Yeah.
it's like, are you like, I want to ask them, like, do you feel closer to your customer this way? Like, do you feel like you really know them this way?
Yeah.
And that's kind of why, like, your experimentation background was interesting to me, because it's
Yeah.
like, shouldn't we be running a bunch of experiments right now?
Yeah. And on that, you bring up a really interesting point, because like what you're referencing is like, does quantity supersede quality? And like we all kind of inherently know the answer to that is no, but where do you draw the line? So like sometimes we'll be working with clients who are like, well, why, you know, we typically average around 4 to 7 experiments per client per month. That's usually our sweet spot. That's a very specific window. I've found over the years, when we start getting to 8, 9, 10, 11, you start to get challenges of muddying of data, because tests will interact with one another and interfere the results. But you also run into this problem in measurement called optimization for local maximum, which is like a statistics way of basically saying you kind of miss the forest for the trees. You run so much experimentation around your hero banner that you miss the point that your add to cart is really the metric that matters right now, not the homepage rate. And so you get into this like rabbit hole of experimentation. And then when you look at the actual holdout, so like a holdout audience compared to the audience that's experienced all these experiments, the delta is not really that big, or not at all. So you've got to take a step back in again. And I know this sounds a bit cliche to say, but focus on the quality, not only of the experimentation, but on the analysis that goes into it. And that, to me, if I could boil down like what I believe in, kind of the difference between what we do and really most other groups that I've interacted with on the experimentation side, is it's that metric centricity, looking at the kind of landscape of a metric architecture and a brand and being like, that's the metric right there that matters. And obviously I'm not talking about like revenue growth. I mean, you know, mobile, female, iOS user cart to checkout rate. That's where we're weakest. Let's dig in. Let's talk to some customers. Let's understand why that may not be converting as well as it should. And let's run experimentation around that particular segment of the site or the application or the platform to improve it. So
Seems
yeah,
like
quality doesn't necessarily supersede quality.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the next generation of marketer, like, you know, there was like the full stack marketer of old, which I think Margaret and I come from. And then we've been in this world of hyper specialization, like you're an email marketer or a social media marketer, et cetera. And one thing I haven't seen is any of the more content focused marketers, not any, but I don't hear as much conversation around like, hey, we need to get better at like understanding at least some core metrics and working that into our strategy. Or, you know, because Margaret and I have talked about the need for experiments right now more than ever. I don't know that anyone like, I don't hear a lot of like, when you scroll LinkedIn, and mine is mostly full of marketers, I don't hear them like curious about stuff like that. It's more like lamenting around the current state. And I feel like that, like being some sort of analytical and experimentation skills seems like they would be really useful and potentially exciting for more content forward marketers to learn right now.
Yeah. And on that note, it's like, what are we really after? Right. And it's like, yes, we're after revenue growth, but the reality is like, what's the truth in terms of what's going to make our value proposition most clear to the right people at the right time, in order that they can understand that we've designed a solution for a particular problem that they likely deal with, whether that's fashion, whether that's nutraceuticals, whether that's skincare. It doesn't matter what it is, some service business. So, you know, what we often find is a lot of times brands will on their own run experimentation just to get a win for the sake of the win, rather than uncovering the truth. And the neat thing about it is when you do it from this like hypothesis generation standpoint, sometimes you're trying to disprove it just as much as you're trying to prove it. which is it's a very different way to look about it when you think about it, right? So an example I'll give you on this is we had a client not too selling a nutraceutical item. And when we first inherited it, you took a look at the site, and if I showed it to you, you'd probably think the way I like, this looks awful. Like, this page is a design. Like, who designed this, right? It looked like a kindergartner put it together. So immediately we were like, okay, let's redesign. Let's do this. It's going to be more intuitive. Immediately when we launched the new design, version 3 lost. I think we did 8 iterations of this. And I used my head of design, right? I mean, Mika is an award-winning UX UI designer. Every one of them lost. So eventually we just picked up the phone and called some of their customers, and we walked them through, and we're dealing with a much older audience. And you know what a bunch of them said to us? When we looked at the base version that this brand had put together, they said it looked like the doctors wrote it. I never would have thought that. That was a fascinating uncovery. They literally, the credibility factor of the quote worst looking page was more impactful to them because they thought the actual medical professionals who they were quoting on the page had done the site. They didn't want to have this fancy looking site. So, I mean, talk about inverting traditional thoughts, right? So there's an example where it's like, it's about uncovering what the consumer actually, like, what is true in this instance. And obviously that's not going to be universal to most. But I mean, what an interesting learning there, right? So instead, we pivoted all the growth strategy and the experimentation towards emphasizing the science, doing way more infographics, way more charts, way more just like, here's the science behind it, regardless of like how it quote looked in the style there, and that started to work. So just kind of an out there example of where sometimes your premeditations are exactly the opposite of the truth when you're dealing with a certain client or consumer.
And you're speaking our language because we talk a lot about that. The definition of quality has to take in consideration of what your customer base like wants to see or needs to see from it. And so it's not, like super sexy design. It's like, what do they want? They want to make sure that they are going to buy something that's trusted. And so I think that's like the new definition of quality is it has to take in consideration of your target customer base. It can't be your definition of quality.
Yeah, exactly. And then to make it even more complex, I mean, who's your consumer archetype? I mean, most data shops are going to agree there's 60, 68 different consumer archetypes that we all fall into. And it's not who's your customer, it's which of those buckets are you over or under indexed on? So based on that, it's like, that's what we need to look at. And they think differently, I mean, they are on different levels of discretionary income scales. They have different things that motivate them. I mean, they're all different. And so, again, there's really no one size fits all. Sure, there's some truisms that exist out there, but yeah, it's a really fascinating time. And like, Margaret, you had put out a piece recently talking about like the next, I think, I'm probably butchering this, but it's like the next gen marketer is going to be thinking from a standpoint of like behavioral psychology. It's like, yes, exactly. Like understanding, reading consumer analytics, and then interacting with traditional tenets of behavioral psychology, behavioral economics is the key to it so
Yeah.
There's like a follow-up I wanted to ask to what you were just talking to, but I do kind of want to dig into the behavioral side of things a little bit more. I think that's like something that, I might be able to relate the two together. So like one of the things you talked about was just like calling up the customers finally and talking to them human to human.
Yeah.
And that's something that, Margaret and I have been talking a lot about, which is like a lot of the growth tactics that are working best right now are less of that, like, inbound marketing, writing the blog posts, but more down funnel activities like community building and the stuff that's hard to measure, even some of the media, deployment that marketing teams have used. Like those are always harder to tie back to those, core
conversion metrics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so like I'm interested in the intersection of those activities and experimentation, because like, is there a way that applying an experimentation hi, it's Thursday. The experimentation like frameworks or mindsets can like create something tangible, some sort of tangible representation of outcomes from doing those activities that might benefit a lot of marketers who are trying to, pitch new ideas to their companies.
Yeah.
And then like, well, I'll start there and then I have a follow-up on the behavioral side, but
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. I mean, one is from just a broader perspective when looking at like inbound channels, and this is something that, frankly, I think Power Digital and the data intelligence team is second to none on, is understanding incrementality, which is, the funnel isn't real, if that makes sense, right? The funnel
Oh,
is
yeah.
this beautiful, like, hey, awareness, and hey, you came to the website, and then you got activated, and then you bought, and now you repeat purchase. It's a mess. It's all over the place. It zigzags up and down, left and right, everywhere you can imagine, across now a myriad of channels in a world where we're having more and more lack of first-party data attribution. So we don't really know. So incrementality testing will uncover a tremendous amount of insight as to what channels are legitimately driving what value. And then you run experimentation, whether it's creative centric or copy centric or ad placement centric, or even just channel budget centric, you'll see the actual incremental lifts or lack thereof when it gets down to the money round, which is people actually transacting or repeat purchasing, right? So some of the appraisals, for instance, are incredible to show brands like really where money is going and where they're actually getting those returns. But also, to your point, a lot of this becomes like, and I work with a lot of clients on this, is not only in the actual application of experimentation, but trying to induce this like culture of experimentation, right? Which is, like first and foremost, everyone's ideation should be unbridled, right? So the way the model works is it's like first and foremost, and the most important part, and this is where most groups get it wrong, is analyzing data and identifying a metric that matters. And that may sound like, oh, okay, well, we'll just look at conversion rate and say, let's improve it. But it's like, well, conversion rate's a very blunt metric. That's just a numerator denominator equation. It doesn't tell you a whole lot about what's going on in the ecosystem. What I want to hear is more of like our add to cart rate from paid media first time users is disproportionately lower than every other channel, right? Like 80%, that's an exaggeration, 30% lower, right? Okay, great. That's a good metric to work on. Now let's go into the hypothesis stage or the ideation stage. That is unbridled. Doesn't matter if it's the founder of the company, the agency lead, the account manager, my mom, some stranger, customers. It should be, everybody should participate in that process, because you'll uncover gold when you start to like open the aperture in terms of who can contribute on ideation. Then you go back to objective, where it's like, okay, you take all these ideas and you objective rank them down. Doesn't matter whose ideas it was. Again, it doesn't matter if it's the CEO or the account manager or a customer or a stranger. Everyone's ideas are equally weighted and objectively ranked down to what is most likely going to impact that metric and it's easiest to run. Those are really the two big inputs, right? Our conviction on the impact and how easy it is. And then you design and build the experiment and you run it. And then you understand and you all basically huddle again to see what happened. If it won, great, proved kind of the alternative hypothesis. If it did, alternative hypothesis did not beat the null. Therefore, what did we learn about the consumer? And it's really just rinse and repeat. That's it. That's the elixir to growth with really any brand, right? Rinse and repeat that model. So to your point, I mean, trying to get brands to think along this, get away from like hippo syndrome, highest paid person in the room's opinion, trying to get as far away from that as you can and get into real empirical methodology and growth strategy is it. So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, you can tell I'm passionate about this. Like I'm a huge proponent in like this cultural input to brands to get them thinking along these lines.
Yeah.
The thing that I've realized is hardest to get teams to understand is that success of an experiment is not that it increased the conversion, but it's truly that you understand a new data point or a new thing, or like success of the experiment is that you have more knowledge, not that it necessarily worked. And that's a really tough thing to get teams to kind of switch their mindset around, because there's a lot of perfectionists out there that think that they're going to get skewered if not every experiment works.
Yeah. I mean, bingo. Like exactly. I mean, to give a real life example, just this week, we had gotten a win on a test where, and this is very straightforward, but we were hypothesizing that given the engagement times of how quickly people were moving through the top of funnel pages, the homepage, collection page, et cetera, product pages, that even those who added to cart were not absorbing the real value proposition of the actual product. It was almost like this haphazard add to cart, and they had really disproportionate cart checkout rate dips. So very basic hypothesis, which is just building in a carousel of iconography to remind the user of the core value props on the warranties this product had. It's made in the USA, the efficacy of the manufacturing and ingredient process, et cetera, and that worked. So to your point, it's not just that it worked and we grew revenue, it's that we proved people were in fact not absorbing as much content as we thought they were up. Because otherwise, if they were, repeating it wouldn't have done much, right? So again, getting to the truth and trying to prove or disprove hypotheses is really is the key to it. And to your point, not just like getting some arbitrary revenue lift.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of like when I was running Animals, which was a content agency, like I forget when I implemented this, but I two of our values were curiosity and bravery. And I sort of combined those into a new mandate, or not mandate, but a new, I guess, cultural thing around experimentation. And I was like, we want to run experiments ourselves. We want to encourage our clients to run experiments because, especially when we were getting into 2022 and the signs were on the wall very early that things were about to get chaotic. It was important to me that, folks were thinking with flexibility and were ready to lead their clients through, a volatile time when there was a risk that the playbook, as it were, that folks are used to following wasn't going to work the same way anymore. And so I love that, like, I really hear strongly the culture of experimentation side, because that is where, like starting it at the top gives the space and permission, but it's harder, like you said, if you're starting it from a creative team, right? And then trying to communicate that upwards, it's a little bit tougher to get buy-in. Whereas like if it starts from the top, like I think there's a lot more built in there. But actually, Margaret, you had a question around like that kind of around behavior and changing tactics, because I think is kind of a relevant follow-up.
Yeah, and we were talking about this right before we joined the live stream, and I think there's a really interesting thing happening right now where channels might be changing, behavior in channels might be changing pretty rapidly, but there's some like core human psychology pieces that are not going to change. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through like what will change and what will remain the same over the next year, 2 years, whatever it might be.
Yeah, good point. Some of these we kind of touched on a little bit already, but like, I mean, the big one to me is, and this is always a fun exercise, right? Which is if you're a brand owner, as an example, take your site, take your whatever your platform is as an example, whatever your traditional marketing landing events are, typically pages, and show it to somebody who doesn't know your brand. Give them 30 seconds to a minute, maybe a minute and a half, and have them sell it back to you and see what they pick up and what they miss. And you'll be shocked to see how much of what you thought your value proposition in trying to transmit that education to the user got totally missed or misunderstood. So kind of going back to like what will always be relevant, and what I think we've gotten a little away from, getting really cute with site designs and app designs and this and that, is just going back to first principles with like a problem agitate solution path, right? Which is like the classic sales model, which is you state a problem, you agitate that, and then you go into the solution, if you will, right? Which is, here's why our product is the ideal solution for that, whatever it is. Obviously, for certain brands, it's going to be a little bit more visual, like a fashion site or an accessory site, et cetera. But still, just being very crystal clear on like what makes you different, right? A lot of brands get away from that, or they use this really high level, almost just like hyperbolic introduction to their brand, which is we're on the cutting edge and da 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 da. And it's like
changing the world.
Yeah. And it's like, so what do you do again? So kind of just going back to first principles on that and explaining what it is that you do and why that's valuable to the recipient who's absorbing that information. Also, again, the other behavioral tactics, like we talked about, urgency, scarcity, those always be levers, right? Because it's just human psych. I mean, you're driving down the street and you see two restaurants, one on the left, one on the right. One on the right's got a line of cars trying to get in. Which one are you more curious about, right? And it's just classic behavioral psych, right? So when you start to highlight how many people have brought your product, the types of reviews that you've gotten back, how much exposure you've gotten, et cetera, I mean, that creates a curiosity factor. Also, when you have scarcity, right? Certain products are going in and out of inventory, or, we use the airline example before, highlighting that only a few seats are left, or only a few products left, or you're selling really fast. I mean, these are basic tenets that will, in my opinion, forever be applicable. Discounting is always going to be a thing, but again, we are seeing diminishing some returns there. But I'm with you, going back to some first principles on just behavioral, making sure users can understand your value prop. What are you doing and why are you doing it? And if you can display that passion too, that's just kind of the premium on top of it. But
what about you, like personas, marketing personas? Curious what you think about the structure of them, because just thinking about, there are some behavioral like bullets in there, but I feel like when I think about a marketing persona, it's very much about like industry, title, place in the org, motivations, etc. But like they don't feel, they're very
Unactionable.
yeah, or like they're good for, setting up like paid campaigns, or like they kind of have the criteria built in for a more technical marketing activity, but it feels like it is missing that color you need to understand, like, oh, for this type of product, our homepage needs to actually be like more specific. We can't do that whole big brand statement at the top. It actually has to be like, we are an X that does Y.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't know if I feel like that's something you might have a take on.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of just said it right there, which is, I mean, you're never going to get the answers perfectly handed to you, but there's clues in all that. So again, it's like, depending on the type of consumer that you over-index on, which you generally, most brands are going to have 4, 5, 6 different consumer archetypes that they're most over-indexed on. Okay, who are those folks, and what do you think that's most important to them? Where are they on the price elasticity scale, as an example, right? Some of them are extremely caught in a price point, and they tend to balk a lot at that. Others almost find like they get disincentivized when you discount because it loses the exclusivity factor, as an example, right? So, you can take those simply to generate hypotheses. That's really what it is. It's never going to answer the whole thing for you, but it'll help you generate hypotheses that are closer to the truth. And then you run experimentation to prove or disprove those out. And it's kind of like this game where you're going through a maze trying to just test different strategies to find what is the ultimate truth to what your consumers want to read, what's most important to them about your product deliverable or service deliverable, and then how they can lever that best for their own personal benefit. And, quantitative data is critical, but so is qualitative. You pick up the phone and you call some of them, right? You have conversations, and you just do it the old school way and talk to 50 or 100 of them and just chat and just see what's up. If they weren't going to buy, why? What would have held them up, right? What do they love most about you? And you'll uncover some gold there that will prove or disprove what you're uncovering in these generalized data points that come from like consumer typical, definition like type of analyses. So it's just clues help you generate better hypotheses and then test those.
Yeah, like I would love a buyer persona that's like, we're selling into this mid-level manager who is not as good at getting, typically less experience in getting executive buy-in. And they're really worried about like, weaknesses they have in, budgeting, or like, and they're at a stage in their career where like, they really want to get from I don't usually see that type of color in a marketing persona on the B2B side anyway. So.
I'm fascinated by this. Like, did you say 68 consumer archetypes?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, look, if you're going to do like a TensorFlow style analysis, I mean, what I buy into is there's these different buckets, and they all have definitions. One of them is called like boom with confidence, which is, your typical baby boomer generation, someone who's probably either just retired or retired. They've got a nice nest egg. They're playing a lot more golf and tennis. They're traveling more. They have a different view on what types of products and what they're willing to spend and what's important to them than someone who's, just out of college and has a good job, but doesn't have a lot of discretionary income, is, got a couple rooms and trying to make sure that they're being very savings conscious, to people who just started a family. I mean, it's again, there's all these different archetypes that people typically fall into. And it kind of transcends to the political divides and culturalisms and all of that. Right? So it's a really fascinating way to dive in. But most brands never look at that type of stuff. And it's not like the answer. It's just more data that you can use to, again, generate hypotheses. And that's really kind of the key to it. So it's really important. Brands, especially larger brands, spend a lot of time digging in on that.
And I'm thinking too about like in the B2B context, it's something that we miss all the time. Like I have not thought of, I've thought of, to Devin's point, like marketing personas and blah, blah, blah. I have not thought about is there a consistent consumer archetype of the people that we're selling into for B2B, right? Because you are selling to a person. But even like, what is that, executive layer? It might be that it's right before what did you say? Confident boomer, or what was the
booming with confidence? Yeah.
Boomer with confidence. Like that could be a lot of our B2B consumers, right?
Yeah, totally. And the interesting about it is if you're in kind of B2B, you can almost generate your own archetype in a way. And what I mean by that is, again, you have conversations with them and figure out what's important and what are the points that they keep bringing up. In every conversation you have, you find these denominators, right? And start to get those down and piece together who is your consumer and what's important to them and what maybe isn't as important to them. And then who you're talking to at that point. And again, it's just doing the right legwork to understand what's true and then running experimentation to prove that, right? And that's always the key thing. Don't think you nailed it. A lot of times you think you got it and it's not quite there. You're close, but it's not quite. So hence the process of experimentation, again, to kind of turn the dial enough to get it right.
Well, I'm even thinking of how that then extrapolates into brand and community and swag and all those sorts of things. Like you're thinking of, I'm going to an industry conference at the end of the month for one of my bigger clients that it's in the distribution space, right? There's like software for distributors. And we were joking around. We're like, well, we're not going to get like bucket hats. Like we're not going to get like cool, like hip swag. We're going to get like, traditional, maybe some golf polos, maybe some enamel pins, like, to put on the jackets. And like thinking about that, I think is as a B2B in the B2B space is really interesting.
Yeah. Something people will actually enjoy, right? Yeah. So you kind of did your homework a little bit there. Yeah. Very, very, very much the same model.
So we only have a couple minutes left. So I kind of want to ask a question a little bit zoomed out, which is like, I don't know. I was really excited to talk to you today because my boyfriend's really into experimentation, and CRO. And so I feel like behind the scenes, we have these really fun, nerdy conversations, that I don't necessarily have with, a lot of the other marketers, in my orbit. I have exciting conversations with them, by the way, just not in this specific vein. So I'm kind of wondering, like, are there skills that, like, what do you think the next sort of marketers over the next couple of years, like, do you think there needs to be a new type of marketer, or do you think marketers need to adopt certain skills to be more valuable over the next few years as we're kind of, oh no. That's I asked a bad question. No. Oh no.
We'll wait for him to rejoin.
Yes.
The
internet is broken today.
The internet is broken everywhere, I think. If there are folks too on the line that have calls. We're broken. The internet is broken.
This week is almost over.
I know. If folks have questions too for either Devin and I or once Ned comes back, feel free to drop them in the chat.
I think I did something. I think I hosted this on the Don't Say Content page and it's invisible.
No, it's visible.
Okay.
I had popped in and saw that there was I popped into the LinkedIn and put myself on mute and saw that there was people here. So what should we chat about until Ned joins?
Do you think there are any skills that marketers need?
I mean, I think the thesis of this whole call has been this experimentation, right? And also I think it becomes, I think more about like a personality than a skill set. And it's like that personality to be unbothered if the thing that you experimented with or tested didn't work. Right. And I think that it goes back to there's so many perfectionists out there. And I think especially as everything is changing underneath us, it's easy to try to then over index on perfectionism as a way to control outcomes. Right.
Yeah, this is not a perfectionist climate at all.
No, it's like, I think it's like kind of working on yourself to figure out your perfectionism. And I think that's going to be huge for people to just be able to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not a playbook that you have to follow perfectly. You have to experiment to find this next level of playbook.
Yeah. And also, like, I think there's a bravery inherent in this experimentation mindset where, like, if whatever you're leading in a marketing team, It's like you need to. Hi, Ned.
He's back.
Sorry, folks. Yeah, I don't know why computer just disconnected.
No, it's all right. You were a little choppy too, so I think maybe your internet was just fighting for its life.
That's what happened when I tried to start this in the first place.
Yes.
But yeah, I think
bad
like
internet
that.
day.
I think it does take a marketer right now. Like what would be interesting to me if I were running a marketing team right now, or even a practitioner, is to have that bravery to be open to doing experiments and pitching that upwards, and maybe even just doing it without without worrying about your metric, right? I feel like a lot of people, what I see is they're like, well, I'm held to this metric, and if I do this other thing, then I'm going to be off goal. And I'm like, I mean, like, that's not like metrics, like having KPIs isn't meant to be a prison, right? And I think it's going to take a brave marketer right now to experiment in the ways that I like more, which I think is really important, given all the volatility in the efficacy of what used to work, and then also that and the analytical piece. I feel like when I started to develop that, and it was usually through working with folks and other teams who were on the more technical side of marketing, it's like that made me even more curious and creative because I knew better what to do with information, which only made me want more and only enabled me more to put different pieces together that didn't seem like they go together to try stuff. And so, but Ned, let's go back to, since we stayed on topic, so that, but like,
We tried.
yeah, we tried. But like, yeah, what do you think? Like, is there a new generation of marketer that needs to develop, or like, are there new skills that you think marketers need now that they didn't necessarily before?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's not necessarily a new skill, but it's a skill that people need to spend more time getting better at, which is learning how to synthesize data. And obviously you probably guessed this one was coming, and I'm pretty partial to this, but I mean, the amount of groups I work with where, people don't even really measure the hygienic nature of the data, let alone understand how to infer insights from it. And this is a whole nother world to get into, like understanding classic type 1, type 2 errors, understanding causality versus correlations. Just like these are big things you got to really understand in order to synthesize data and derive suggestions and hypotheses out of it, right? So, and that to me kind of goes to another point you had mentioned about the bravery aspect, which is data and the support of data behind a hypothesis should always be your security guard. And what I mean by that is, let's assume you went after this experiment and revenue didn't grow, and some higher ups upset about it. It's like, well, I understand, but take a look at this. This is what I found. This is what it looks like it means. So I wanted to test against that. Do you have other ideas that maybe, because again, this data is real. And when you say it from that perspective, it's pretty hard for someone to kind of criticize you, because you're like, A, great job finding that data point. B, totally see why you came up with that hypothesis. Maybe it wasn't the right one, but that's okay. Versus if you kind of take the approach like, well, I don't know, I just kind of thought this is better. That gets into my word versus yours, and that's a tough place to be in, right? So to me, data is your best friend, right? Because it will validate why you made every decision. And unfortunately, some of the decisions you make are not right, but that's okay, because that's why you experiment in the first place, and you use this data to support that. So
yeah. And it's like, I think, oh, sorry, Margaret, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to go back to I really loved earlier in the conversation where you were talking about roles and responsibilities through the experimentation process. And it's like, you have to find the place in which you will, in fact, experiment. And then you can open it up to then the ideation phase can include lots of different ideas from lots of different people. And then it's and then it comes back into who's actually going to execute those ideas as different roles and responsibilities. And I think where I see a lot of you were talking about HIPPO, I call it the executive swoop and poop, comes from a misalignment of not having that first thing set in stone. And then if people don't have that first thing set in stone, and there's so many ideas and ideations and tests and experiments that are just on the table, they kind of have to feel like they're always fighting, rather than let's agree here that this is the thing that we're gonna figure out how to move, and then let's ideate and use all of this brain power in a productive place. But totally. I just loved when you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to the data, which is, if the CEO or whomever in the room is like, no, we should focus over there, not here. It's like, well, where? Just with all respect, where are you seeing that in the data? because this is what I'm seeing. And if you see it differently, let's talk about it. Great. Let's just have a conversation about it. But the data pretty clearly points that like, that's where we're weak. And then again, in a hypothesis, it's like, well, let's just kind of independently review those and determine kind of who has the best hypothesis. There's no pride of ownership in it. It's like, whatever, we're all on the same team here, just trying to get a win. And then most importantly, get to the truth, right? So again, data is your best friend. Like learn how to synthesize
conversation, right? Like data invites conversation.
Sure,
You can bring people together because you're like, you know, you're going to have your analysis, but also presenting that to a room, being like, hey guys, like, here are the different things that I saw. Here's my take on this. Like, what are your thoughts? Or like, you know, and it's just like, I think that's a really cool way to collaborate better with your, like, even potentially your higher ups. Right. And I do feel that like I'm not a data scientist. Okay. Like
Ned is.
What?
I said Ned is.
Exactly. But like, you don't need to be in order to apply or to utilize data and analysis in your like marketing plans, marketing experiments. Like you don't have to be an expert. Like I think you can, like, I think there is some like principles you can learn around experimentation, you know, some ability to like use Google Analytics, but like I'm of the belief that not every, like, to leverage this, you don't have to be an expert and you don't have to go to like data science school, which tells you about how much I know about data science and school. So
well, a lot of times you just, I mean, kind of surface level read it. The ideas come naturally. And a lot of times clients will be like, that was a brilliant idea. And it's like, well, thank you. But with all respect, it wasn't that brilliant. It's just the data kind of pointed us in that direction. You know, it was easy to uncover. I mean, you got a classic example. You're looking at a website, right, that maybe has an engagement rate of 82%, really strong, but an engagement time of 36 seconds. So what does that mean? Well, clearly people are engaging, meaning they're getting into the site, but they spend a awfully short amount of time. So we've got a superficial problem there where they're not really digesting much content, but something intrigued them, likely imagery right out of the gates, to dive in. So where is our problem? Is it top of funnel? Probably not, because they're getting engaged right out of the gates. It's the second and third steps that keeps them engaged, right? And so that's not rocket. That's just kind of reading it and being like, what does this mean? Well, it could mean that. Okay, well, let's go test to see if that's true or not, right? So, you know, again, you can come to some really interesting conclusions based on just learning how to read the fundamentals of data. And when I say data, I mean like just getting your Google Analytics. You know what I mean? Let's just start there, right?
Ned, I have a question for you. Is it hard to hire folks for the agency, and how much, once you hire somebody in, how much like onboarding in this culture of experimentation methodology training do you need to do versus like how many people are like ripe and ready and can join and just hop in?
So we have, of course, different roles in the organization, right? And so let's just talk about kind of on the execution. We have the designers, we have developers, we have data analysts. They're very specific to their skill set, but we also have account managers and what we call growth leads, which are like the CRO leads. They're the senior strategists, right? Every one of the CRO leads I've spent a lot of time personally with, or kind of my heads of CRO spent a lot of times personally with training. So the reality is very rarely are we able to pull someone in right into that position. They need a lot of training. So we typically actually start them in the account management role so they can watch and learn. They're there for 6 months, a year and a half, what have you, before they have the opportunity to potentially promote up. That way they've personally overseen, 500 to 1,000 experiments, right? And they've understood some new ways of going about deriving experimentation and ideation. So on one hand, we love hiring those who they're hungry. They've just got a lot of passion about helping the clients. On the other hand, it's extremely challenging to hire someone who gets this model right out of the gates. You really got to train that. But that's kind of the beauty of it. It's awesome. As you can tell, it's like gospel to me, right? So it's like we're training other evangelical, supporters of the mission here. So, it's definitely an internal training process for sure. But once they get it, I mean, some of the folks are just, rock stars. They're so impressive to watch. It really is. It's a joy.
Nice. We're supposed to wrap up on time. So I'm going to do that for once. I was ahead of time this time. Technically, we were supposed to wrap 10 minutes ago, but I'm going to call this on time. Okay, Ned, I feel like I want to ask you, if there are any like resources or articles or whatever that people might want to read. And so maybe we'll follow up with those in our newsletter. And just any recommendations you have around like communities that talk about this stuff a lot or whatever. Cause I think, this was like, I feel like we got to nerd out for a second in a new way. And I want to have more conversations like this. So is there a final thing we need to know from Ned? Is there like, do we have any?
What's your conversion point right now, Ned? What do you want people to convert on?
Yeah.
Yeah, for kind of this conversation for us. I mean, I love looking under the hood, right? So if you're running an e-commerce site, if you're running a consumer-facing mobile or web application, right, as an example, anything that has a decently fast sales cycle, right? I'd love to look under the hood for you, right? I mean, I generally do a lot of complimentary audits for brands where I'll look under the hood and identify some learnings that are likely going to be pretty helpful for you, and I'll give you some ideation and such. So I'm always open to have those conversations. I really enjoy doing this, right? I love looking at brands and breaking them down and figuring out what's true and what's not true. And, it's a lot of fun for me. So yeah, if anyone's interested, please reach out. LinkedIn, on powerdigital.com. You can find us there. Just let me know, and I'd love to help.
We should do another one where we workshop. Like we have an example that a company agrees, and we could do it.
Do a live audit. That'd be cool.
Do it live. We're doing it live.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
that would be really cool.
Hey, Luke.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Ned, thank you so much for joining us. It was a blast. Everybody else, this will be on the feed later today, I believe. So
I think so. I think Katie said that. So
yeah,
quick turnaround time.
And you're all doing great. You're doing great. A little bit great.
We're not doing great today.
We're not doing great.
I can't say that about myself, but after this call, I feel like I'm doing better. So thank you, Ned.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.